My name is Elise Hallberg. In this house, that name used to mean nothing more than the extra chair, the quiet one, or worse, the guest. Last night, I sat down at my family's long oak dinner table for the first time in 6 years. No one stood to greet me. No one said my name. They just glanced first at my shoes, as then at the coat I hadn't changed since college. Odessa, my sister, lifted her wine and smiled like it was a stage cue. "Still riding the bus, Elise?" she asked, soft and smug. I didn't respond. I just folded my napkin, reached for my water, and let the silk sleeve of my coat slip ever so slightly. That's when they saw it. The ring. Mom's fork paused midair. Dad's knuckles went white around the wineglass. Odessa's smirk died in her throat. A cushion-cut diamond vintage setting, one of 5 ever made, worth more than everything in that room combined. "Oh, this," I said, twisting it gently on my finger. "Just something I picked up on a quiet Tuesday." I didn't come back to talk about money. I came back to let the silence speak. And this time they were finally listening. The clink of silverware felt louder than it should have, like the house itself was trying to remind me I didn't belong. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the one that used to be my grandmother's, and no one moved to help me pull the chair. I didn't expect them to. Odessa was already halfway through describing a property she'd sold in Pacific Heights. "Cash buyers, of course," she said with a theatrical laugh. I told them the view wasn't worth $9 million, but they insisted. Mom beamed her pearls, catching the light. "That's our girl," she said, reaching for another serving of roasted chicken. Dad, or more accurately, Gordon, my mother's second husband, grunted in agreement, without looking up from his plate. I'd forgotten how good he was at pretending I wasn't there. No one asked me how I'd been. No one offered me water. And still, I sat there folding my napkin neatly across my lap, like I hadn't been erased from every photograph in the hallway just 3 years ago. Odessa raised her glass again. "To family," she said, eyes on me. "Even the ones who show up like ghosts." The toast hung in the air untouched. I reached for the mashed potatoes. No one passed them. I had to lean over someone's elbow to get them. I scooped a modest portion, not because I was shy, but because it didn't seem worth the energy to take more. Mom cleared her throat. "Still wearing that coat?" she asked, gesturing vaguely toward my shoulder. "It's cashmere," I replied, not looking up. Her lips curled almost imperceptibly. "Vintage, then." I let the insult pass. I hadn't come here to defend fabrics. I hadn't come here to defend anything. The conversations continued weaving around me, like I wasn't part of the thread. Odessa launched into the details of a charity gala in Sausalito. Gordon talked about golf. Mom described the church's new stained glass fundraiser like it was the Vatican's next architectural milestone. Eventually, someone asked the question I'd been waiting for. "So Elise," Mom said lightly, slicing into her chicken, "still working on that little nonprofit of yours? Or has the city condemned the building already?" Before I could answer, Odessa leaned in. "Oh, come on. She's probably squatting somewhere in the Mission. Rent's too high for dreams, right?" I set down my fork carefully. My sleeve shifted as I reached for my water. The diamond caught the light again. This time, they saw it fully. Odessa blinked first. Mom's mouth parted slightly. Gordon stared, trying to understand what he was seeing. "Is that," Mom started. I turned the ring slowly with my thumb just once. "Something I picked up," I said softly on a quiet Tuesday. And just like that, the meal stopped pretending to be a meal. It became a reckoning. For a moment, no one spoke. I could hear the hum of the old thermostat kick on in the hallway, that faint rattle in the vent that used to make my grandmother laugh. "This house coughs when it lies," she once told me when I was small and still believed adults only lied by accident. I looked down the length of the table. Her chair, the one at the very end, the one no one ever dared touch, sat empty. No cushion, no place setting, just the bare wood and the slight indent on the arms where her hands used to rest, fingers calloused from decades of sewing canning tending. My voice came quieter than I intended. "No one set a place for her. Odessa didn't even glance over. She's not coming back, Elise." I nodded once. "Neither am I. Not if this is what you've done with her memory." Mom sighed like I had embarrassed her in front of polite company. "We remember her plenty. We donated the sewing machine to Goodwill. You want credit for that, too?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. After dinner, when those plates were cleared and the silence became ambient again, I stepped into the hallway. The gallery wall used to be a mosaic of family history, black and white photos of my grandmother's youth Polaroids. From Easter brunch, the faded print of her on the back porch, holding a peach cobbler like it was gold. They were all gone. In their place, Odessa's real estate awards, Gordon's golf trophies, a framed flyer for some investment seminar Mom claimed she'd co-hosted. At the center, where Grandma Liza's portrait used to hang, was a full-color ad featuring Odessa in a white blazer and perfect teeth. Odessa Shaw Real Estate. We sell more because we care more. I stood still. My hand found the edge of the frame. It was cold. Impossibly cold. She built this house, I said softly to no one. Odessa's voice came from behind me. And you soaked it in self-pity. I turned slowly. She was already stepping into the light wine glass, in hand smile brittle. No, I replied. I just refused to sell her memory for PR. Her face didn't move at first, but I saw at the flicker behind her eyes, a single muscle tightening along her jaw. Dinner ended not long after that, wrapped in a tension that didn't loosen even when the dishes were rinsed. No one thanked me for helping clear the table. They never had. But before I left the room, I walked to the old chair at the head of the table, the one they'd left empty, and gently laid the lavender shawl across its back. The same shawl Grandma wore every winter, soft and worn with tiny pearls sewn in. Her armor, she used to say, for cold rooms. I didn't say a word. I let the gesture speak instead. The guest room hadn't changed much. Same chipped dresser, same floral curtains that barely blocked the porch light. But it wasn't really a room for guests, not anymore. It felt like a storage unit for everything they didn't want to see, but weren't ready to throw away. I opened the top drawer of the dresser and found it right where I'd left it the last time I'd come back years ago, when the air still smelled like camphor, and hope a lavender envelope with my name in looping script. Inside, the handwriting trembled, but the words did not. My Elise. If they forget, you let them. But don't forget yourself. And don't forget what I hid for you. The key is real. The silence isn't. Speak. Grandma. I turned the envelope over. Taped to the back was a small rusted skeleton key, delicate but heavy, like it had waited years to be held again. I didn't sleep much that night. Just lay awake, clutching the key in my hand, like it could unlock something inside me, not just a door. By morning, I was already dressed, coat-buttoned hair pinned back. I tucked the key into my pocket and drove 20 minutes north past the edge of town to a small law office nestled between a shuttered donut shop and a faded laundromat. Durant and Merrick attorneys at law. Mr. Horace Durant was older than I remembered, thinner, slower, but his eyes lit up when I walked in. She said you might come, he told me, nodding once. She made arrangements, very clear ones. He handed me a thick folder, certified, notarized, witnessed. The real will. Grandma Liza had changed everything 2 years before her death. The house, the land in Montana. The savings accounts, the jewelry box she never opened for anyone. Every last bit was mine. She said it would cause trouble, Durant added quietly, but she trusted you to handle it. There was also a letter this one typed addressed to my mother and Odessa, instructing them to vacate the premises within 30 days if they contested the will. Durant handed it over with a slight grimace. They forged another one, didn't they? I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. As I stepped out of the office, the autumn air cut clean through me, but I didn't shiver. I had something stronger than warmth now. I had proof. That night back at the house, I stood by the fireplace staring at the portrait of my grandmother that somehow hadn't been taken down. I slipped the skeleton key from my coat pocket, held it up to the light, and whispered, "You trusted me. I won't let them bury that." I didn't know yet what the key opened, but I knew what it unlocked: resolve. 3 weeks later, I stood in a courtroom that smelled like old varnish and dust, facing the people who had once called me invisible. My mother, Delea, sat in a cream blazer that made her look more brittle than dignified. Odessa was beside her, all in black, like she was the one in mourning. Gordon, of course, had shown up late and red-eyed, still carrying the air of a man who thought his name alone should grant him victory. I didn't look at them. Instead, I kept my eyes on the judge, an older woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and a gaze that didn't blink without a reason. To her left sat Mr. Durant, my grandmother's attorney, calm and composed with the real will in hand. To her right, the document they'd forged, riddled with inconsistent typefaces, an incorrect middle initial, and a signature that looked like it had been copied from a check. "I've reviewed both submissions," the judge began, her voice steady. "And the evidence presented is troubling." Odessa shifted. Delia's lips went tight. Durant stood. "We'd also like to submit this." He held up a flash drive. The judge nodded. On the screen behind her, the courtroom projector flickered to life. A shaky recording began to play. Mom's voice, first hushed but clear. "We'll keep her comfortable, then sell the land before Elise catches wind. Then, Gordon, that Montana property alone could pay off the HELOC. Don't tell Elise. And finally, Odessa, if she asks questions, I'll handle it. She always folds when you push hard enough." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was annihilating. Delia's face drained of color. Gordon's jaw worked like he wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Odessa stared straight ahead, blinking too often. I rose slowly. The judge hadn't asked me to speak, but no one stopped me either. "My grandmother wasn't confused," I said. "She was clear about what she saw, about what she wanted, and about who she trusted. You didn't erase her, you erased yourselves." The judge cleared her throat. "The forged document is hereby nullified. The court recognizes the 2022 will as the legally binding version. All assets therein are to be transferred solely to Ms. Elise Hallberg." She glanced at the defense table. "Restitution in the amount of $216,000 is due to Ms. Hallberg, adjusted for interest, effective immediately." Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Restraining orders will be issued." The gavel struck once hard final. No one stood. No one clapped. Justice doesn't need applause, only acknowledgement. As I gathered my folder, I saw Gordon slumped back, stunned. Delia's hands gripped the edge of the table like it might keep her from falling. Odessa looked like someone had pulled the mask right off her face. I didn't linger. Outside, the air was sharp but cleansing. The courthouse steps felt higher than they'd been going up, but I didn't stumble. I descended with purpose, like someone who no longer had to shrink to survive. Behind me, the courtroom door creaked shut. Ahead of me, the truth had already opened something far more permanent. 2 weeks later, I opened the doors to a borrowed space downtown. It used to be a church-stained glass, still filtered the light in slow, soft colors. But now it was mine, if only for a day. I called it unspoken. There were no podiums, no speeches, just tables, easels, quiet corners. On the back wall I pinned the shawl, her shawl, pale lavender with pearl details frayed at the edges, folded as if she'd just taken it off to pour tea. Next to it, her recipe cards yellowed and smudged. A half-finished quilt. The last letter she ever wrote. A photo of her as a young girl in Mississippi, barefoot on a porch, eyes already carrying the weight of generations. Each piece was labeled in small print, Liza Hallberg. Unseen, unspoken, unforgettable. At first, the space was still. Then, slowly it filled. Church friends, neighbors, strangers who had once been touched by her quiet generosity. A man in scrubs stood frozen before her handwritten poem. "She paid my son's tuition," he whispered. "Said it was just extra change. Wouldn't even let us say thank you." An older woman touched the frame of a black and white photo. "She used to bring soup every week. Said it tasted better when no one knew who made it." I nodded, but didn't speak. Stories flowed like warm water, so gentle, yet so unstoppable. It wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about legacy, real legacy, the kind you can't list on a ledger. Then the door opened. I didn't need to turn. I felt it. Delia's heels hit the floor like accusations. Odessa walked 2 steps behind, her head low, but eyes scanning everything, calculating. They reached the quilt wall. "This is slander," Mom hissed, voice shaking but still sharp. "You've made a circus out of family grief." I didn't respond. A man in a linen shirt approached her calmly. "Hugo, the gallery manager. This is a private exhibition," he said. "Invitation only." Odessa looked at me, pleading this time. "Why are you doing this?" I met her eyes. "You buried her while she was still breathing." "I'm just digging her back out." Before either could reply, a woman in a press badge stepped in. "Ms. Delia Hallberg, we're following up on a forged will filed last year under your name." The silence hit harder than any headline. They left. No words, no parting threats. just vanished like smoke when the room stops feeding the fire. Later, as the last guests drifted out, I stood in front of her quilt again. She hadn't needed me to defend her. She'd only needed someone to remember her out loud. Montana was colder than I remembered. The kind of cold that didn't just sit on your skin. It soaked into your breath, your bones, your memory. The property was tucked behind a narrow dirt road, just past a bent wooden sign that said, "Private, no hunting." Pines stood like sentinels, and the sky above them stretched wide too big for any one person to carry alone. In the center of it all stood a single outbuilding, weathered siding, tin roof. A brass plaque nailed crookedly to the door Liza's vault. I stood in front of it longer than I meant to. The skeleton key in my hand felt heavier now. Real. Final. The lock gave with a sigh like it had been waiting to breathe again. Inside, the air was dry and still, with the faint scent of cedar and old paper. Boxes lined the shelves neat, labeled in her handwriting, Paris, 1963. Taxes. Do not touch unless you're Elise. That one was near the floor. I reached for it with a trembling hand. Inside, a leather-bound accordion folder filled with documents, legal, financial, personal. Stocks in companies I'd never heard of. Deeds. A bank statement with more zeros than I could process. Quiet wealth carefully guarded. Beneath that, wrapped in a silk scarf I recognized from her church days, was a velvet ring box. It clicked open like it had been closed just yesterday. Inside sat a diamond ring, oval-cut vintage setting, heavy with presents. The one I wore at dinner. But this time it wasn't just beautiful. It was known. Tucked underneath the satin cushion was a handwritten note, short and final. For your own hand, not anyone else's. Let them see it when they call you worthless. But remember, its weight isn't in the stone. It's in the years you carried silence and still chose to stay kind. I stared at it for a long time. Not the diamond, the note, her words, her knowing. I thought about every time I had sat quietly while they mocked me. Every time I passed up explaining myself because it wouldn't have mattered. Every time I gave more than I was asked and received less than I deserved. And I slid the ring back on my finger, not like a trophy, not like a symbol of victory, but like a seal. A reminder that someone once saw me fully and didn't flinch. There was more in the vault. A savings bond she'd never cashed. A tin box of letters she'd written but never sent. One to me, one to my father. One marked simply, for truth. I didn't open them all, not yet. I stepped outside with the ring on my hand and the flannel blanket she always kept in her truck slung over my shoulders. The wind in Montana doesn't whisper. It listens. That night, I didn't stay in a hotel. I lit a small fire in the clearing, boiled water on a camping stove, and sat in the quiet, surrounded by the one thing that had never turned on me, the land she left behind, the land I now owned. I didn't say much out loud, just 4 words spoken low into the air. Thank you for seeing me. I returned to the house just before sunrise. Pasadena was still asleep. The streetlights blinked against the early morning fog, and the neighbors' windows glowed faintly, unaware that anything had shifted. But everything had. I slipped through the side gate, the same one I used to sneak through as a teenager. The backyard was wild now, overgrown weeds, broken trellis, tomato cages rusted and empty. The garden my grandmother once tended with her bare hands had been forgotten just like her. I knelt beside the old raised bed, pulled on her gardening gloves, still a size too big, and pressed my palms into the soil. It was still soft, still good. I pulled out the envelope she'd left me. On the back in her handwriting, it read, "Last summer's seeds." Inside were tiny dry tomato seeds, heirloom speckled saved like secrets. I planted them slowly one by one. I didn't rush. Each seed felt like a sentence unfinished, like a story waiting to rise. When I finished, I stood and looked around the yard. There was no applause, no audience, just wind brushing through the rosemary bush and the faint scent of lemons from the kitchen window. Inside the house was quiet. For the first time, it didn't feel like it was watching me, judging me. I poured a cup of chamomile tea, wrapped myself in her flannel blanket, and stood by the window. The morning light spilled across the floor, landing right at the edge of the garden. I watched as it caught the edges of the dirt I'd just turned, like the sun itself was blessing what had been buried too long. The ring on my hand sparkled again. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about being seen not for what I could prove or earn, but for what I'd chosen to carry in silence. For who I had remained even when no one was watching. Some stories don't shout. They grow. And that morning, I saw the first green shoot breaking through the soil. It was enough.